feeling like you're maybe drowning in information about how colleges and universities actually run strategically, you're definitely in the right place. We've waded through a stack of material, specifically Richard L. Morrill's Strategic Leadership, to pull out the vital insights, the ones you need.
Yeah.
Think of this as maybe your cheat sheet to understanding the often mysterious world of higher education strategy.
And it really boils down to this. Strategic leadership is where the nuts and bolts of strategy meet the art of leadership.
Right.
Over the course of this deep dive, we're going straight to Morrill's work to explore the essential pieces of this puzzle. We want to give you a clear, structured picture without getting lost in all the academic jargon.
Exactly. We've been poring over key sections from Morrill's book. It's part of the American Council on Education series. We're talking about chapters like creating, situating, an integrative strategy process, strategic governance, mission, and its frustrations.
Yeah, strategic position, implementation, quite a bit.
Right? Implementation. From strategic leadership to strategic management. So we're covering some serious ground here.
Our mission today is pretty simple. Extract the most valuable knowledge on strategic leadership in higher ed.
Okay.
We're zeroing in on the core ideas, the real challenges, the frameworks Morrill lays out, and importantly, making sure you can connect these to, real-wanted understanding.
Okay, let's unpack this then. When we talk about strategic leadership in a university setting, what does that actually mean? It feels like it should be more than just, the president calling all the shots.
You've hit on a really fundamental point there. Morrill stresses that it's a truly collaborative, interactive thing.
Interactive.
Yeah, it's not solely about what individual leaders do, but the dynamic interplay between leaders and, followers, those they lead. There's this concept, reciprocal leadership, which suggests that leader and follower roles can actually shift.
Shift, how so?
Depending on who brings the most relevant skills or knowledge to the table at that moment, it's an idea leadership thinker Gil Hickman talks about.
So it's not just a top-down affair. That's a fascinating twist. It sounds like the old command and control model doesn't really fit higher ed.
Precisely. And, consider the distinction James McGregor Burns drew between transactional and transforming leadership.
Transactional versus transforming. Remind me.
Sure. Transactional is more about an exchange. You do this for me, I do that for you. Sort of quid pro quo.
Got it.
Strategic leadership, though, it leans towards the transforming model. It aims for something deeper, inspiring people, challenging assumptions, driving real, meaningful change.
And that fits the university context better.
Well, Morrill certainly emphasizes a relational understanding of leadership in academic communities, highlighting how interconnected these places are.
That makes a lot of sense when you think about all the different groups involved: faculty, staff, students, alumni, the board. I mean, the list goes on. Which naturally leads me to wonder, how does any decision actually get made in such a complex web? It sounds messy.
That complexity is, it's a core challenge. Decision-making in colleges and universities can often feel quite fragmented, different silos.
Fragmented, okay.
Cohen and March famously characterized universities as organized anarchies.
Organized anarchies. That sounds like a contradiction.
It's not chaotic in a negative way necessarily, but they have features like problematic goals.
Problematic goals. Okay, what does that mean? Explain that one.
So think about a university's mission statement. Often, right, to get broad support and avoid internal fights. These statements are written in such general terms that they become pretty ambiguous.
Okay, so everyone can sort of see themselves in it, but it doesn't commit too hard.
Exactly. As Cohen and March kind of joked, you could give a lecture on the goals of the university, but hardly anyone would show up because the goals are often so broad they lack, real teeth. That's a key challenge, Morrill points out.
Okay, so with these complicated decision paths and maybe fuzzy goals, where does a clear strategy even come from? I've heard, really strong opinions both ways, that strategic planning in higher ed is either totally essential or just a massive waste of time and resources.
You've definitely touched on a big debate. There's a huge spectrum of views on strategic planning in universities.
Right.
You'll find places that credit their strategic plans with their very survival, literally, and then others that see the whole process as just, bureaucratic box ticking.
Ending up with a dusty document on a shelf somewhere.
Exactly. A document that gathers dust. We all know the common tools, those SWOT analysis, mission, vision statements. Those are pretty standard elements.
But how is crafting a strategy for a university different from, say, doing it for a business? It can't just be about the bottom line, surely.
That's a really crucial distinction. Corporate strategy often zeroes in on maximizing shareholder value, right? In higher education, the focus shifts. It's about things like educational quality, academic excellence, fulfilling the institution's specific mission, whatever that might be.
So advantage means something different.
Totally different. It's less about grabbing market share and more about achieving, say, academic distinction or serving its educational purpose effectively.
Right.
And there's also this long-standing tension, between the traditional idea of the paradigm of the academy, this protected space for scholarly inquiry.
Right, the ivory tower idea.
Sort of.
Oh.
And the growing pressures from market forces, which sometimes leads to this slightly uncomfortable notion of University Inc.
The university run like a business. Yeah, I've heard that.
It's a constant balancing act.
So practically speaking then, how does a university actually do strategic planning in this unique, sometimes conflicted environment? Are there specific steps Morrill suggests? Key components?
Morrill really emphasizes what he calls an integrative strategy process. A central piece he proposes is creating something like a strategic planning council or, an equivalent body with a different name.
An SPC, okay, like a central coordinating team.
Exactly. A group representing the whole university, reporting directly to the president, its main job, coordinating strategic efforts across all those diverse parts we talked about.
That sounds like it could really help with that fragmentation issue. What would this council actually do day to day or year to year?
Its responsibilities would include identifying the most critical strategic issues and priorities, based on a solid understanding of both the university's internal strengths and weaknesses.
The SWOT stuff.
Right, and the external opportunities and threats. The PEACE analysis we'll get to.
Okay.
Now, it wouldn't necessarily dictate every single policy, but its work, especially if it's backed by the governing board, would set the overall strategic direction. It kind of encourages collaborative leadership in the process.
And how do they track progress? Just gut feeling.
No, definitely not. Morrill also highlights using strategic indicators. Think of them as metrics.
Metrics, okay, like what?
Metrics that reflect the university's identity. Are we living our mission? Its performance, are our programs actually hitting their targets? And its aspirations, are we moving towards that long-term vision? These indicators help inform decisions and assess how things are going.
Right, makes sense. Now, moving beyond just the data and the formal plans, Morrill also talks quite a bit about the role of narrative. That feels a bit less tangible. How does storytelling fit into strategic leadership?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental, really central. Morrill argues that narratives of identity and aspiration are crucial.
Identity and aspiration stories.
Yeah. These stories communicate an institution's core values, and they deeply influence its organizational culture. He sees values, these guiding narratives, and the underlying paradigms, the basic ways people think there, as all interconnected.
Interconnected.
The key insight isn't just having a good story, though, is making sure that story is lived, embedded in actions, policies, everyday language. If there's a disconnect, the narrative just feels hollow, right?
Yeah, completely. Can you give me a concrete example? Like, how does this narrative thing play out in a real university?
Sure. Consider Center College. It's a good example Morrill uses. Their narrative, which featured prominently in their strategic planning, is all about being a small liberal arts college with an outsized national impact.
Okay, punching above their weight.
Exactly. There's this historical quote from Woodrow Wilson suggesting Center had produced more distinguished people than Princeton back in the day. That became a really powerful, enduring part of their story.
Wow.
It shapes their identity around this idea of achieving excellence and leadership, despite maybe having fewer resources or being in a particular location.
Huh. A historical soundbite can really have that much staying power.
Yeah.
So how do you take that kind of inspiring story and actually use it to guide where the university is going now?
Well, the crucial step is translating that big institutional narrative into concrete themes and core values that resonate today.
Bringing it up to date.
Right. For Center College, this concept of tough love emerged as a central theme. High academic expectations combined with strong institutional support.
Tough love, okay.
And then these core values, they need to be actively linked to specific things, events, programs, everyday practices, make them more than just words on a page.
So people see them in action.
Precisely.
Hmm.
Ultimately, Morrill argues effective leaders need to not just know and tell the organization's story, but also actively enact and embody it in how they lead, walk the talk, essentially.
Okay, so we've got a sense of identity, maybe a guiding story, aspirations, but we also need to understand the world we're operating in, right? That's where this idea of strategic position comes in.
Exactly right. Understanding your strategic position involves a careful look both outwards at the external environment and inwards at the institution itself.
Outside and inside.
Yeah. The environmental scan is essential for spotting those external forces shaping higher education's future. Tools like PEACE,
PEACE, what's that stand for?
political, economic, social, and technological trends. It gives you a structure to examine these forces.
Gotcha. Examples.
Oh, think about current trends like declining state funding for public universities, the increasing demand for more accessible, flexible education options, or, the rapid changes in educational technology, all critical parts of that external landscape.
Makes sense. And then looking inward, we use SWOT analysis, right?
Yeah.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Feels like every organization does a SWOT. What's the key to making it actually useful in a university context?
Well, the framework itself is pretty common, yeah, but the application needs to be really tailored to the unique nature of higher ed.
Okay.
For universities, it's particularly important to identify core competencies.
Core competencies, like what makes them special?
Exactly, those distinctive capabilities that are hard for other places to copy. These go beyond just specific programs or buildings. They're the fundamental abilities and expertise driving success.
Things you're uniquely good at.
Right. And scenario planning also becomes really valuable here.
Scenarios. Like what ifs.
Yeah, developing plausible future scenarios, like what if government funding changes dramatically? Or what if student demographics shift significantly? It helps you think through possibilities and inform decisions. Morrill mentions the Adams University examples, business as usual, creative self-reliance, competitive marketplace, illustrating how you can explore different potential futures.
Okay, planning for different possibilities. That sounds smart. So let's say we've done all this analysis, we've figured out our story, identified goals. How do we actually make these things happen? How do we get from this high-level strategic leadership to the more practical strategic management, as Morrill calls it?
That transition is absolutely critical. It's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
As Morrill emphasizes, a compelling vision without effective execution is, well, it's just an unrealized dream. Strategy development moves from those broad themes and long-term goals down to creating specific plans and actual steps you can take.
Getting concrete.
Exactly. Strategic initiatives, or sometimes called strategic imperatives, serve as those central organizing themes that focus the university's efforts. And it's important they aren't just vague, generic areas like improve quality. They need to be clearly defined priorities that really crystallize the focus.
Okay, specific initiatives, and
Then strategic goals need to be as specific and measurable as possible. Now, acknowledging not everything important is easily quantifiable.
Right, like promoting democratic citizenship or something. Hard to put a number on that.
Exactly. But you can find proxies. Maybe measure it through student volunteer hours or participation in community projects. And then actions are the individual decisions and activities launching a new program, changing a policy that directly support achieving those goals.
So it cascades down.
Yeah.
Themes, initiatives, goals, actions. And actually putting all of this into practice. In a university, with so many different people, departments, maybe competing priorities, that can't be simple.
Yeah.
What are some key things to keep in mind during implementation?
Oh, it's definitely complex. Several factors are crucial for actually making it work. Clear and consistent communication about the strategy is huge.
Telling everyone what the plan is.
And not just once, consistently. And the strategic plan itself, it should probably be presented in different formats for different audiences. Not everyone needs the 100-page version.
Good point. What else?
The strategy needs to align with the existing organizational culture, the shared values, the norms, the way we do things around here. If it clashes too much, it'll face resistance.
Fighting against the current.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, the university's authority structures, the control systems, they need to be strategically oriented to support the new directions. Strategic assessment is vital too.
Assessment. Checking if it's working.
Yeah, embedding ways to continuously self-evaluate. And regular strategic program reviews, monitoring progress, making adjustments as you go. It's not set in stone.
Adaptability.
And finally, the governing board plays a really critical oversight role, ensuring accountability and supporting the implementation efforts.
It sounds like leading a university strategically is just a constant balancing act. especially when you're dealing with all these diverse values and well, the inevitable need for change sometimes.
Absolutely. It really is. There are inherent structural tensions built into academic governance,
Mhm.
political factors, different policy views, deeply held values that can sometimes clash.
Teaching versus research is a classic one.
That's a perfect example. Morrill actually introduces this idea of value reconciliation as a way to handle these seemingly opposing forces.
Value reconciliation.
Yeah, finding common ground, finding ways seemingly opposite values can coexist or even reinforce each other. He draws an analogy to how Dell Computer managed to balance low-cost production with customized options, things that seem contradictory.
Interesting. So finding the and instead of the or.
Kind of. For the teaching research tension, strategic conceptualization, like Boyer explored and scholarship reconsidered, helps find a more holistic balance by recognizing different forms of valid scholarship, not just traditional research.
Broadening the definition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ultimately, strategic leadership is essential for guiding that intentional, sustained change and for embedding responsive decision-making processes throughout the whole organization, not just at the top.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here into Morrill's strategic leadership, what would you say are the most critical takeaways for our listeners, the big picture?
I think the central message is that effective strategic leadership in higher education is fundamentally a collaborative and crucially an ongoing
A
process.
little one-off project.
Definitely not. It's not just about creating a static plan and putting it on the shelf. It's about grounding that plan in a deep understanding of the institution's unique identity, its story, its
Hmm.
values, and continuously adapting to a really complex and always evolving environment. A successful strategy involves not only clear goals and good analysis, but also those compelling narratives that inspire people, and a real commitment to consistent self-evaluation and the willingness to adapt.
It's about being nimble, it sounds like.
Very much so.
And for you, our listener, maybe think about your own context, whether it's your professional life, maybe even personal endeavors. How might these principles, understanding your core values, your own story, the external forces around you, how could that help you lead more strategically and achieve greater impact?
Yeah.
What are the deep questions, as Moore would encourage us to ask, that you should be exploring right now?
That's a great thought to leave people with. And we'd strongly encourage you, if this sparked your interest, to delve further into Richard L. Morrill's strategic leadership itself or other related resources for a much more in-depth understanding.
Yeah, definitely worth it.
Consider how the concepts we've sort of skimmed the surface of today might be relevant to the specific challenges and opportunities you're facing right now.
Absolutely. And be sure to join us for future deep dives into other fascinating topics, often based on what sparks your interest. Thanks for exploring this with us today.
Thanks for tuning in.